I'm from Canada.
Canada! Welcome everyone, I'm Richard Krause with a list of Canadian zombie movies with both gore and brains. I'll tell you about a kid-friendly zombie flick, heavy metal flesh eaters, and a Civil War-era zombie story that Variety says merits appreciation for really trying something different. But I don't think Variety writer Dennis Harvey was suggesting that trying something different meant casting a film critic. That's me as a zombie priest in Exit Humanity. But who knows? In 2010, I interviewed Exit Humanity's director, John Geddes. After our conversation, I said, if you ever make a zombie movie, I'd love to play a zombie. We laughed, but about a year later he reached out, and that's how I ended up appearing very briefly as a hungry zombie with pitch black eyes at the bottom of a large hole that was meant to capture real live people who would later become my zombie lunch. The syrupy fake blood took days to wash off completely, and Brian Cox, who narrated the movie, wasn't there, but I had a good time lumbering around the set for an afternoon as the story of a Confederate soldier's struggle to survive in the aftermath of an undead outbreak during the American Civil War unfurled all around me.
I'll kill you where you stand.
Can't kill a man who's already dead.
I kill lots of men who are already dead.
It's like you said.
Why are you punishing me?
Ain't nothing like pain to remind us that we are still alive.
The very best zombie movies are never simply about the dead coming back to life. Sure, the good ones smear the screen with buckets of blood, but just as important as the gore are the brains, and not just the kind the undead use as entrees. The memorable zombie films use the flesh-hungry creatures as metaphors for societal ills. The father of modern movie zombies, George A. Romero, more from him later, knew this and infused his movies with allegories to social justice and consumerism, among other issues. Director Jeff Barnaby knew that as well. His exciting zombie film Blood Quantum contains a powerful central premise: Indigenous people put in danger by allowing white folks on their land. The film begins with an ancient settler's proverb: "Take heed to thyself, make no treaty with the inhabitants of the land you are entering." It's a portentous warning that foreshadows Blood Quantum's action. Set on an isolated reserve called Red Crow, it takes place before, during, and after a plague that has turned most of the world into bloodthirsty zombies. The Red Crow, however, are immune, placing Tribal Sheriff Traylor, played by Michael Greyeyes, in the position of having to protect the reserve from hordes of undead outsiders.
How long were you out there for?
I lost track of the time.
Did you get bit?
This planet we're on is so sick of our shit. That's why the dead keep coming back to life.
I heard that you can cure bites here.
Ain't nobody immune here but us.
One of them could come in here and infect this entire camp.
Behind you!
You want to live? Blood Quantum offers up the blood and guts you expect from a movie like this, but director Jeff Barnaby also infuses every frame with a vivid sense of Indigenous heritage. From the title, which refers to a much-despised colonial blood measurement system used to establish a person's Indigenous status, to using a zombie apocalypse as a metaphor for the fight against annihilation by colonial settlers, it drips with social awareness and gore. A new take on the zombie apocalypse tale, it brings fresh perspective to a much-examined genre. The characters are well-defined and have emotional arcs amid the madness and skull-crushing. The use of occasional animation sections adds visual interest to an already cool-looking film, and the movie will even make you laugh from time to time. Barnaby and Company deliver on entertainment and intellectual levels. Come for the entrail eating, stay for the cultural observations, and more entrail eating. I spoke with the film star Michael Braaaaiins about the movie and its release during the pandemic.
You know, I've been a big fan of the genre for a long, long time, and I've been a fan of Jeff Barnaby's work. So, of course, for me, it was an absolute no-brainer to come on board. And as I've watched the news the past few weeks, you know, as we sit in lockdown, I'm stunned more and more. You know, for example, in Jeff's film, of course, this particular community, the community of Red Crow, is immune to the plague, but right now no one's immune. Mm-hmm. So the ideas of, you know, being safe and infection and xenophobia and all of these things that are playing across our TV screens feel a lot more visceral. It feels a lot closer to home. And of course, I look at Indian country, and I look at the, you know, serious problems in places like the Navajo Nation. And I'm reminded, of course, that we've been dealing with plagues for our entire history, you know, certainly colonial history. And here we are again. So history repeats itself in really unnerving ways.
I have a quote from you here where you say, "We're survivors. We totally get it. Who would be the best survivor in an actual apocalypse?" And you say us, meaning Indigenous people.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that means?
You know, I was having a conversation with a great friend of mine, Alex Rice, an actress, a Mohawk actress, and she was talking about my work on Fear the Walking Dead. She said, "Oh my gosh, here on the res, we love, you know, The Walking Dead and these things, because who survived, you know, apocalypses better than we have? We've survived the settler apocalypse. You know, we're still here. We're making films. We're creating work. We're living lives. And so I look at disease, and, you know, I just saw a post just yesterday about the smallpox epidemic in Saskatchewan, where I'm from. I'm from Treaty 6 territory. And it decimated our communities, 80 to 90% infection. And the losses in life were devastating. So I look at our small population relative, you know, to, you know, the larger communities, and I look at disease, and I realize actually very, very palpably that the ones who are here, us, we're the survivors of plague after plague, of waves of violence, of genocide. So when I said that in an interview, I was really thinking about the people who allowed us to be here.
The Walking Dead, you mentioned Fear of the Walking Dead, which you were on. Zombie movies in general, I'm told, and this came from an interview that I read with you, are very popular on reservations. And is it for that reason, or is it just because they're like a bloody, gory good time, or is it a little bit of the both?
You know, I don't know. I think for me, always I've been attracted to apocalyptic stories, but what I think is quite interesting is that our access as Indigenous actors, as actors of color, I've found it easier for us to be in post-apocalyptic stories than in non-apocalyptic stories.
Right.
You know, like, for example, you know, obviously for, you know, I would never be in a series like Chernobyl, but in a world where all the rules have, you know, gone away and society has broken down, people of color, and certainly Indigenous people, have found their way into those narratives quite powerfully. So I think when we look at you know, these kinds of films and these kinds of stories, and we see ourselves on screen, I think it reflects powerfully back to our own communities.
Sometimes called the Stephen King of children's literature, R.L. Stine has inspired bad dreams for decades. He's the author of hundreds of horror fiction novels for youngsters, including the classic Goosebumps series and the teen horror comedy Zombie Town, which became a film starring Dan Aykroyd in 2023. The action takes place on one eventful night in Carverville, a small town named after legendary B-movie horror director Len Carver, played by Dan Aykroyd. It's the eve of the premiere of his latest, quote, flesh-drenched extravaganza, his first film in decades. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll kiss your $5 goodbye, screams the film's trailer. When Carver takes ill before the show, the screening is canceled, but projectionist Mike's friend Amy convinces him to give her a private screening. As white light bounces off the blank screen, strange things begin to happen. Mike and Amy protect themselves from the weird glow with film canister lids embossed with an ancient symbol. The symbol's mystical power protects them from the film's magical spell, but outside the theater, all over town, the good folks of Carverville have been transformed into the living dead.
Start the movie!
What is this?
You just roll the film and it turns the actors into the living dead. It has the power to suck the souls out of everyone in its vicinity.
We can stop them from spreading.
Mesmerian had all the knowledge. If he were here, he'd know what to do.
Your films must be burned. You have to destroy them all.
Go to the theater. Stop the projector. That's the last film.
The zombies in Zombie Town may amble around with George A. Romero-style menace, but this is no Night of the Living Dead. The movie aims for that Amblin PG-13 feel, that mix of plucky young people and the supernatural, and does so with no real menace. Sure, the town has been zombified, but the peril and fights are kept to a minimum. It's a bit of fun to see Dan Aykroyd ham it up as the tormented filmmaker in Zombie Town, and cameos from Chevy Chase, Henry Czerny, and Kids in the Hall alums Scott Thompson and Bruce McCullough add a little bit of life to the undead. Look for Zombie Town and other films on this podcast on your local streaming services, but don't forget to support new Canadian films when they play in theaters. For reviews of new and old Canadian movies, check out my website at richardkrause.ca. The 1981 adult animated movie Heavy Metal, directed by Gerald Potterton and produced by Ivan Reitman and Leonard Mogul, who was also the publisher of the Heavy Metal magazine, which was the basis for the film, is an anthology of various science fiction and fantasy stories tied together by a single theme of an evil force that's called the sum of all evils. Often violent and frequently sexual, Heavy Metal featured famous Canadian voices like Eugene Levy, John Vernon, Joe Flaherty, John Candy, Jackie Burroughs, the King of Kensington's Al Waxman, and many others, including Don Franks and the Lovin' Spoonful guitarist Zal Yanofsky in the film's zombie story B-17.
Skip, something's following us.
What is it?
It's some kind of green meteorite.
What? Where?
A World War II set zombie story, the story begins on a B-17 bomber named the Pacific Pearl. After a bombing run, everyone on board is killed, save for the pilot and co-pilot. When the Loch-Nar, the evil force that ties all the film stories together, rams the plane, it reanimates the dead crew members, turning them into flesh-hungry zombies. When the pilot parachutes to the safety of a nearby island, he finds a graveyard of wrecked airplanes and, in a twist worthy of the Crypt Keeper, zombified airmen who attack.
Go!
Heavy Metal was briefly the top-grossing Canadian-made movie until teenage sex comedy Porky surpassed it in 1982. I'll finish off my look at Canadian zombies with a taste of a 2011 interview I did with the godfather of the zombie genre, George A. Romero, who became a Canadian citizen in 2009. We talk about the Night of the Living Dead and how he found a way to add humor into the zombie genre.
The first movie, and all the movies, but I'm thinking of the inspiration for the first movie, it was all about the subtext in that movie. It was about the Vietnam War. It was about all sorts of things.
Yeah.
You know, consumerism is something you've touched on time after time. You know, it's about that. The zombies are just kind of the vessel, I guess, by which you tell the story.
Exactly. No, I just bring the zombies out of the closet when I have something I want to talk about. But no, that's exactly right, and it's so hard to tell people that. I mean, you know, I think most of the people in the audience are either there to just take the ride or, you know, watch the gore, chuckle at the gore, whatever, and don't particularly care. I shouldn't say that because I've been very lucky in terms of people, journalists like yourself, who recognize what you just said, and you know that's very gratifying. But by and large, I don't think the public particularly cares about that, and it's very disappointing that more people that are working in fantasy today don't use it as a metaphor. You know, I mean, it's just sort of, and some of that may be Hollywood, you know, saying, well, we don't need any of that. What we want is the shock and. You know, those values that sell tickets.
When you're writing something like Survival of the Dead, there are, from the first film on, there's been more, I don't want to say comedy, but there's been more humorous elements added into the film, but they are still very much satire. And when you write something like that, I wonder, do you still feel the sort of pangs of anger that you would have from the early days, from your work in the early days, or are you sort of concentrating on the more humorous aspects, or is it a mix of both?
It's certainly not the same kind of anger. I mean, when we made that film, we were children of the 60s. The big thing that everyone talks about Night of the Living Dead is the racial stuff. That was almost accident. I mean, Dwayne Jones was the best actor from among our friends, and we thought we were being very hip by not changing the script when we had an African American that was going to play the lead. But some of the anger in that film, the stuff against family, the stuff against establishment, the whole, I don't think you can ever get that back. And so starting with the second film, which I resisted making a second film for years, 10 years, because people started to write about Night of the Living Dead like it was important American cinema. And I said, "Oi, what am I going to do now?" And I socially knew the people that were developing this big shopping mall near Pittsburgh. It was the first one that any of us had ever seen, big indoor shopping mall. I went out to visit. Before it had opened, the trucks were rolling in with everything that, you know, the American heart could desire. And I said, okay, here's an idea. And from that point on, I said, wow, I can have fun with this. I can have fun with the genre and still say a little something, or at least express my opinion. And from that point, I started to, and it was only really from that point that I started to insist to myself that the movies had to be about something.
Right. Now, for the new film, Survival of the Dead, how did you come up with the family feud aspect of it? And is it getting, are the scenarios coming to you as easily as perhaps they once did, or do you ever find the genre limiting in any way?
I don't find it limiting. In fact, I find it wildly welcoming.
Right.
You know, it's like I can pull the zombies out of the closet and make a movie about anything I want to make it about. It's been terrific that way.
That was the late, great George Romero. You can find his classic movies wherever you legally buy and download films. I'm Richard Krause. Thanks for listening to Maple Syrup for Your Eyes. I'll be back soon with more suggestions. In the meantime, be sure to celebrate and support Canadian films.